right. I do see a lot of familiar faces. So I'm thinking a number of you have been to the HR Inbox series before. Is that correct? How many of you have? Oh, wow, great. Okay, good. It's always good to see familiar faces. And also, just to get a sense of who's in the room, can I ask how many are board members in the room? Okay. And the rest are management or involved in some aspect of compensation at your organizations. So good. So we're going to get started, and it's very much a tag team approach today, and very informal. I'm hoping, as Jackie said, we've got a number of scenarios and a number of exercises for you to do. But you know what I think is really important about today, and which I really hope that you'll leverage over the next 3 hours? We have a comp analyst, a comp specialist in the room, and we don't always get these people in the room. It's so I'm hoping that if you've got a question about your comp program, or as we go through, you will feel quite comfortable to ask Nadia, because we don't always get our comp analysts, and so when we do, we want to make sure we certainly fully utilize them. So please take it upon yourself that if you've got a question, make sure you grab Nadia and ask her. So I hope you're okay with that, Nadia, but I'm not a comp specialist. I know enough about comp to make myself dangerous. And I know when I sit at the board level what questions I need to be asking. But when it comes to our compensation programs, we need to educate ourselves, and we also, I believe, it's always good to have that third-party vetting or somebody to look over your shoulder and say, you know, what do you think about this? Because comp is important. It hits our people's pocketbooks, right? So we want to get comp right. So hence, that's why Nadia is busy. And I think that it is an area of specialty, and so if you've got questions, I really hope that you'll take it upon yourself to ask them today. And we've created lots of time in the agenda so that you can get your questions answered. So the topic, or the title we called this, is How Competitive Are Your Compensation Practices? What we really want to share with you today is, how do you build a framework for your compensation programs, and where can you access information that is affordable so you can make certain that you are structuring and you are developing compensation programs that are competitive. So we're going to give you the framework, and then we're going to give you some information to test your framework to see whether or not you are competitive. And so you'll be able to go away from the session saying, okay, I can go back and have a look at my program, my comp program, and say, is there a piece of work here that needs to be done? Or do we need to maybe just access some information to test it? Or do we need to do maybe a major number on our comp program? And then if that is the case, what are the steps you need to take in order to do that? So that's what we hope to achieve. So in doing that, we've got an agenda. We'll work together, the three of us, over the course of the morning. We'll finish at noon. We'll take a break halfway through the morning. Again, a chance for us to network. And then throughout the morning, we're going to talk about the items on this slide. We're going to start with your compensation philosophy, because that's where it starts when you identify what's important to you and your organization around compensation. We're going to talk about some best practices with respect to the design, and Nadia will help us through that. And then we're going to talk about compensation surveys. Tracy's going to talk to you about the Bolin survey. And we're going to do, throughout the morning, a couple of case studies, but at the end we're going to do a larger case study where you're actually going to take some of the Bolin information and work with it. And then at the end, Tracy's going to talk to us a little bit about compensation trends. So that's our morning, and as I said, we're hoping to keep it quite interactive. So what I'm going to start with is a question, and I'd like you to work at your tables and just spend a few minutes talking about compensation philosophies. What is a compensation philosophy, and why is it important in establishing a competitive compensation program? So some of you may have compensation philosophies at your organization, and if you do, please share that with the people sitting with you, and spend a couple of minutes to talk what it is and why is it important. And I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that, and then I'll check back in. Group as a full group, you're going to notice that over the course of the morning, I'm kind of a bit of a taskmaster, right? We got a lot to cover over 3 hours, so interaction's important, but I will probably cut you off a little bit sooner than maybe you would like, just so we make sure that we cover the whole agenda items and we keep ourselves on task. So, and I do want others to hear your thoughts and thinking that's coming out of your table. So we need to make time for that too. So can I just ask, what did you hear as you sat at your table with respect to what is a comp philosophy and why is it important? So let's start with this table back here. What did you guys come up with? Do you need the mic? You're going to do the mic? Did you come up with what you're...
The newbies, because none of us have...
None of you guys have comp philosophies?
We have no philosophies.
Okay, all right.
There you go. That's just
You don't have comp philosophies in your organization?
Between all
Okay.
of us, we didn't
All right.
come up
What
with even
table
one
had a
example.
comp philosophy? Who had a comp philosophy? Do you guys? No.
Let's see, give them more money.
So nobody in the room has a comp philosophy. Ah, we have somebody who's got a comp philosophy.
What our funders will give us.
That's the philosophy, is what our funders will give us.
That's the best we got. That's the
Okay,
best we
and
got.
actually, you know what? I hear that a lot in the sector. They go, what's the point of having a comp philosophy? Because it's really dependent on whether or not we get funding. And so I hear you with respect to that, but I really want you to shift that paradigm. And I know it relies on funding, but plan that you're going to get funding and have a comp philosophy, because we want to set ourselves up for success. So I really encourage you that even though it relies on funding, still have a comp philosophy. And you can build into your comp philosophy the fact that you have to get funding in order to fund the philosophy and the program. You can build that into your philosophy. But build it in if that's important, and it is to the sector, but still have a comp philosophy that will speak to a number of items. And we're going to talk about what are some of the items that you should have in your comp philosophy. And many of us will have comp philosophies that maybe are in our head or in our board's head or in our ED's head. And I think I heard that at this table, right? It's not written down. Did I hear that at your table? Who have comp philosophies that's not written down, but you kind of have an idea of what you're doing? Okay, do you want to talk about what that looks like?
Well, in our organization, we utilize Boland survey.
Okay.
And we just want to make sure that all employees are within the 90 percentile.
Okay.
And every time the Boland comes up, the result, sometime in October, right? We look at it, and those who fell below 90, that's where we make a market adjustment.
Thank you for sharing. And it's Cynthia, right? Christina. Because you know what, Christina, you do have a comp philosophy then. You want, because they participate in the Boland survey, that tells me you would want to be market competitive within the sector. And two, you want to pay at the 90th percentile as a minimum. That's part of your comp philosophy. So thank you for sharing that. And I think if many of us are sitting there thinking, okay, we probably have a comp philosophy then, we kind of have an idea what we're doing and how we administer to it, start jotting down what are the aspects, because that will become part of your comp philosophy. And so why is the comp philosophy important? Why is it important to do this?
It's a framework for decision making.
It's a framework for decision making, exactly. And everybody is aligned. And who in your organization do you want to make sure understands your comp philosophy? First and foremost.
Good employees.
Good employees, your staff, maybe. Who else? The board. The board, exactly. Because at the end of the day, management can have all these wonderful ideas about what they want to do, but if it's not approved by the board philosophically on how you manage salaries, you may not be able to carry it out. So it is important for staff to communicate
And you will most likely want to communicate aspects of your comp philosophy, but first and foremost, that comp philosophy needs to be approved by the board. That's your marching orders as management to go away and do your work. So really important that your comp philosophy is put down, it's discussed with your board and approved by your board. And that becomes your framework, as Rob says, to develop your program and to communicate to your people as well. So just some guiding, the what and the whys comp philosophies. And if you look into your toolbox, you'll see that our group has put together some guiding principles and some tips. Can everybody find that in their toolbox or their pamphlets? There should be some guiding principles there on putting together a comp philosophy. Can you find that? Okay, good. And there's actually a sample comp philosophy there as well. So, you know, a bit of a cheat sheet on things that to keep top of mind as you put together your philosophy. But really it's your guiding principles on how to put and frame your compensation program. And it really should be very, very aligned. I hate one-offs, right? So whatever we do, we always want it to be aligned, right? So your comp philosophy needs to be aligned with your mission, your vision, and your values. So you're thinking about how do we compensate people based on where we want to go, how we want to go, and the values in the organization. So keeping that in mind when you develop your comp philosophy. It talks about your competitive positioning. We just heard you want to be at least at the 90th percentile. So again, that needs to be built into your philosophy. And you might also want to build into your philosophy, where do we want to be as a minimum? And what's the maximum that we would pay? And why would we pay the maximum? So again, thinking in terms of that as you put together your comp philosophy as well. And you know, there are aspects of your comp philosophy that will be important to the board, will be important to you to administer, and will be important to your staff. So you will pick key components out of your comp philosophy that you will use to communicate to staff. You may not, seldom do I see your whole comp philosophy put in front of your staff, right? Because it's really management's guidelines, principles on how to administer salary. But there are components of your philosophy that you will want to share with staff, right? Especially if you're one of the key things you value and want in your comp philosophy is that you're going to be market competitive within the sector. Saying that and telling that to your people will be really important. And how do you define within the sector again? Drill down, because that's the comparison. That's how you're going to develop your program. And we're going to get Nadia to talk about leading the market, lagging the market, and lead lag. And I'm going to leave that to Nadia to talk about. But those descriptors would be good to put in your comp philosophy. And what are the things you'll include in your comp program? This is a great conversation to have with your board. Do we want to be bonusing people? Like bonuses in the past for the not-for-profit sector were things that you never saw. You're starting to see them now, right? So having a conversation with your board, within management first and then with your board to say, is that relative to us? Could we even do that? And what would that look like? Because if a yes to that, you'd want to build it into your comp philosophy, and you will want to talk to your board about it, because the last thing you'd want is you as management thinking, oh yeah, bonuses would be great, and your board said, I don't think so. So, you know, building that into your comp philosophy so you know what you're going to include. Short-term incentives, long-term incentives, group benefits. What is it that you need to pay attention to within when you're building your program? So again, think about all of those items, write it down. What are you trying to do? And that is your comp philosophy, and that's what you want to take to your board to get approval, to say, yes, we agree with all of that. Any questions on the comp philosophy? You've got your little cheat sheet there. We're going to actually have you do a little exercise where you try to put together a comp philosophy. But first, Nadia, could you talk a little bit about when you're building your comp philosophy, the importance of paying attention to market positioning?
Yeah. Definitely. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Okay, awesome. Just adding on to what Janet was saying about compensation philosophy, the most important thing I think for an organization to clearly define is, does our organization want to be externally competitive, or is our focus going to be internally equitable? And most organizations today in our market in Calgary choose the first one, externally competitive, and that's where you're going to focus on the market data or leading or lagging the market. But I just want to let you know that there are organizations who do value market data as a secondary source, but they have in their compensation philosophy that our organization, our main priority is to be internally equitable. And when you're talking about internally equitable, it's fairness on how long employees have been there, fairness on their experience level, which doesn't always exactly tie to what the market is paying. That doesn't necessarily mean they disregard the market data, it just means they might consider that as a secondary source. So I just want to let you know that that's something you need to define in your comp philosophy, is what is our focus, externally or internally competitive. And then should your focus be externally competitive, meaning you do care what the market is paying for its people, it would be nice to go a step further and then say, for our compensation philosophy, like Cynthia, you mentioned we want to pay, sorry, Christina, you mentioned that we want to pay our employees at the 90th percentile of the survey data, and that's great if you have a set percentile. A lot of the organizations will just say we want to pay at the middle of the market, the 50th percentile. But going a step further, an organization could say we want to lead the market, and what lead the market means is that they'll take a look at the market data, and at the beginning of the year, they'll set their pay levels equivalent to what the market is anticipated to be at the end of the year. What that means is that from the beginning of at the beginning of the year, they start paying slightly higher than their competitors, and throughout the year, they're one step up. Lag the market is the opposite, where they'll set their pay at the beginning of the year to what the market is right now. Then as the year progresses, their pay or their salaries lag the market. And by the end of the year, they're slightly lower than their competitors. And then we have a lead lag the market, means at the beginning of the year, they set their salaries to what the market's paying, what they're anticipated to pay at the middle of the year. So for the first half of the year, they're ahead of the market. The second half of the year, they're below the market. And I just want you guys to think a little bit what strategy might be best for an organization. Let's say your organization wants to attract top talent, like the best of the best, the most qualified. Which of these three strategies might you consider? Lead the market? Why would you consider to lead the market?
You want to attract the best of the best, and of course bring them on.
Exactly. And that's exactly it. Companies that really need that top talent definitely go for lead the market. And then lag the market companies, while they might offer a slightly less base salary, they might offer more training and development opportunities or something like that. So based on your organization's needs and what you're looking for, you would choose a strategy appropriately.
You know, just thinking back to the philosophy, and again, this is focused on pay, right?
Right.
So if your philosophy actually is you're going to have a very competitive total compensation program, but say within that you're going to, say lead lag on pay,
Right.
you're going to lead on benefits. So I'm just thinking there's some other decisions here outside of pay.
Absolutely, there's so many different components.
When you say that we want to attract the best, it's an assumption that they're going to be attracted by the top pay. And in many cases, that's probably the case, but not in all cases.
Yeah.
People will actually look for, more flex time or
And that's why that's really good to put that into philosophy. Think that through. Do you want to lead lag on base? Do you want to lead lag on total comp? What is it that you're trying to do? Thinking those through are critical, because that's how you're going to frame your program.
Right, and like you said, there are several components to consider, but this is just like an added step in your comp philosophy, making it a little bit more complex, adding a little more detail, and trying to really define what it is your organization is looking for and how your strategy is to attract them. And also, like, a big part of considering your desired market position, is thinking, how do we want to pay in comparison to our peers or our competitors? And so it might, when you're designing your comp philosophy, you also might want to consider, well, so-and-so is our competitor and this is their strategy. Do we want to employ the same strategy or go totally 180 sort of thing? So does that make sense?
Thanks, Maddie.
Okay, no worries.
We're going to put you to work, and we're going to actually get you to develop comp philosophy. One of the things I want you to remember, though, and we talked about it, and sorry, I can't remember, it's Cameron, sorry. Cameron mentioned it, but what about funding? If we don't have funding, what's the point of having a philosophy? As not-for-profits, I think that it's diligent for us to put in our comp philosophy that ability to pay is based upon funding. It keeps it top of mind for us, and it also gives your assurance to the board that we're not talking pie in the sky here, we're being relevant. It will rely on funding. It will also challenge us as management to bloody well find the funding. So I think that in order to be relevant and to be diligent within the sector, you need to have a clause in your comp philosophy about funding. Rob also mentions a really good point. When you're thinking about your comp philosophy, think in terms of total compensation, because within the sector, we may not be able to lead the market or lead the market with pay, but we might be able to lead the market in some of the ancillary benefits that we offer our people. So what might that look like? That might look like extra time off. That might look like flex time. So get creative in your comp philosophy and think in terms of, if you can lead, where might you lead? Because we know many people come to the sector not for the great big salaries that we earn, but also for the lifestyle, for the balance potentially in life. We come to the sector for different reasons, right? So think of all of those things when you're thinking about your comp philosophy, because that's what you're going to ask your board to say yes to, and that's what you're going to administer your program to. So we're going to put you to work, and we're ask you what might be the comp philosophy, and this is a hypothetical, but what might be the compensation philosophy of a nonprofit that has secured funding for the next 3 years and has an aggressive mandate to grow the programs offered by the association and to be leading edge in its approach? What organizations would be in the competitive market comparison? So you'll want to build that into your philosophy. Who are you comparing yourselves to? What would be the target positioning in the market? And what would be included in the compensation program? So I want you to have some table talk. Take a look at the cheat sheet that we've provided in your worksheet and come up with some bullet points. You don't need to phrase in nice fluffy words what the comp philosophy reads like. I want bullet points. What are some of the bullet points that you'll want to put in your comp philosophy? And we'll give you we'll give you at least 5 minutes. Can I get everybody together as a full group, and let's just talk through some of the aspects that you would want to have in your comp philosophy if you were this organization and if you were this not-for-profit. So the first bullet point being, what organizations would be in the competitive market comparison? So if you went to the board and say, okay, we want to compare ourselves against this, what would this be?
Depend on what the company says.
Okay, think in terms, so it would compare against what to define your sector, right? Okay, that's good. If you're thinking about geographical location, if you're thinking about budgets, what were some of the things, what type of organizations in terms of geographic and budget would you want to compare yourselves against? Because those are things you would look at in the survey, right? Who are we comparing ourselves geographically to and also budget-wise to? So if you were an aggressive organization wanting to do all of this in 3 years, what should be what might be your geographical location? Narrow or broader?
Broader.
Broader. Why?
Oh, well, I would say probably you might be looking at Western Canada, for example.
Okay, exactly.
Canada, but you might be looking at
Right, you probably are looking more than local, because you're trying to attract some key talent, right? So your comp philosophy will want to speak about geographical. Is it local? Is it Western Canada? Is it Alberta? Is it national? What about budget? What would your comp philosophy, who are you comparing yourself budget-wise? Smaller than you, the same as you, or larger than you? I heard same size. You might want same size. Could there be an argument to go a bit larger? There could be, yeah, because you're seeing things in here, you need to be aggressive, so you might, in order to attract the talent that you want, you might have to go to a bit larger budget than you're actually administering right now to get the talent that you want. But I'm not saying you would have to, but these are things to think about, right? And to sort of think about that as management, because you're taking this to your board to get them to give a head nod, because that's your marching orders then as you come back and start looking at developing your program, looking at survey data, right? What about, what would be included in the comp program? Are you just going to address base pay in your comp philosophy, or are you going to go broader? What would you want to do? Broader, definitely. Your comp philosophy should be talking about total compensation, not just base pay. So make sure that you're thinking about all aspects of compensation, because you need to be thinking broad like that in order to attract the talent that you're going to need in order to be successful. So does that sort of help you in some of the things you want to think about as you put together your comp philosophy? Any questions? Yes.
Do you then put kind of a timeline, or, okay, so let's say you're doing a 3-year plan. Do you have like a roadmap? So we're here and
Yeah.
we're not here, so
Right.
we now have to.
That's a really important part of developing your framework and your program. But initial step is but a lot of management will say, geez, you know, I'm afraid to put my comp philosophy together because I really don't know where we sit, right? We can have these great grandiose ideas that this is where we want to be, but we have no idea, is that even relevant? Because we don't know where we are today. So actually we've gone in and we've worked with management, because we have to first establish where are they, right, in order for them to figure out and where do we want to go to, because they want to put something together to the board that makes sense, right? So yes, there is an element of figuring out where you are in order to say, does this comp philosophy even make sense? So yes, there is a piece of work there, but I wouldn't put that in your comp philosophy. Once you know that is, then you decide what it is you want to be. In this scenario here, though, this is a sort of like a new startup sort of thing, right? So they don't have that history, right?
They must have a strategic plan that's going to.
Definitely, and that's what their comp philosophy will want to be aligned with. Now, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, and the other thing, just to add to that question over there, is that there's no harm for a startup company or something after the 3-year period to revisit that comp philosophy, where they were as a startup, where they are now if they've matured as an organization, to go and revisit how they want to pay their people and whatnot.
You don't typically change your comp philosophy every year, though, right?
Yeah, that's true, unless
Yeah.
your organization has, you know, from a startup to
Right.
a matured organization.
Okay, thank you. The same as way you don't tend to change your strategy every year. You know, you usually got a 3-year strategy or whatever, so your comp philosophy tends to be aligned with that. Okay, so when we're talking about program design, these are all of the things that you'll want to think about and words that you might want to utilize in your comp philosophy. What do you want to be? Is it, and Natty talked really nicely this morning about that decision, internally focused versus externally focused. I find for most not-for-profits, it's you want both, right? Your values speak to treating people fairly, internal is important, but you can't ignore the market. So it's usually a combination of both, but typically you have to say, you know what, in order to get data in that, I do need to be market focused, so I need to make sure I build that in as well. We can't ignore, and most not-for-profits too, I mean, treating people fairly, equitably are all part of our values, right? So we tend to probably want to see both. And you know, affordable, there's the not-for-profit word, right? Like we have to have a program that we can afford, right? So you want to make sure you build that into your program, into your design. Legally defensible. What I'd suggest is, and what we would suggest, Natty, correct me if I'm wrong, is pick for your objectives 4 maybe, right? And focus on those 4. Don't try to build all of this into your comp philosophy. Oh my God, it'll go on for pages, right? Pick 4, maybe, what do you say, 4 or 5, Nadia, that are important, right, and focus on those, right? Build a program around that. Yes?
Question. If you're in an organization that is complex in the sense that it has
a significant number of employees, but also has contractors and also
Yeah,
has
right.
people on a retainer. Do you have any advice for addressing the equity issue, the internal equity issue when it comes to, dealing with those different layers? Because there's obviously a risk that people on retainer, people
Right.
contractors can be paid significantly more.
Right. Yeah. Do you want to take that, Nadia?
Yeah, just to reiterate the question for the video, you're just asking in an organization that's complex in size with contractors, employees, all types of people, how do we kind of balance that internally equitable issue? Is that kind of what I get what you're saying? So my prior organizations, not a non-for-profit, but a large energy services company, the second largest in the world, we had that issue as well, and what we defined in our comp philosophy is both. We want to be both internally equitable and market competitive, but if push came to shove and we had to prioritize one, it is going to be market competitive. And that's the philosophy we had to use when hiring new people, and kind of put that above, well, this is what some of the other people who have already been here for a while are making, because we had to stay competitive with the market, and that was our landscape and whatnot. That being said, while that was overall company-wide, for different employee groups such as field or tradespeople or contractors, we put in place specific incentive programs that were customized to each of those groups based on what we needed from them, their objectives. Does that sort of make sense? And so for such a large organization, I would not expect a one-fits-all bonus program. Like, I would expect different ones for your different employee groups.
Yeah, not so much even size, right? But I think the risk that can happen in that situation is the type of talent that you're contracting with on retainer is high talent and,
Yeah, and like any...
You almost create a dual system.
I totally get what you're saying, and like any organization, there's always going to be like hot jobs or jobs that are so hard to get that talent for, and you always have to pay top wages for those jobs. So that's kind of like an exception. The comp philosophy is just more of a overall guiding for the organization, but you definitely it's definitely okay to customize it for specific employee groups.
And what we're seeing, thanks Nadia, what we're seeing in the sector 5 years ago, first of all, you would see many organizations didn't even have a comp philosophy and were very loosely defined programs, right? But the sector is changing now. And then you saw an evolution to where one size fits all. You were seeing that, right? So, but now I would have to see it's evolving again, and you are seeing differentiation within that, right? And it's just because of we're in a recession now, and you say, give your head a shake, are we really, fighting over talent? The day will come where the talent issue has not gone away, right? So differentiating is a reality of our world today. And, but I would have to say in the sector, internal equity is critical. I mean, that many not-for-profits, that's very, very important to them. So it's that fine gray area of how do we do that and also attract top talent. We're going to give you some tips on how you might do that as we go through the morning. Okay. Just a list of some of the things that you'll want to think about as you put together your total compensation and what should be included when you look at total comp. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but it's basically remember that it's so much more than just base pay, right? It's about all aspects of reward and recognition, flex time, especially for the sector, especially for the not-for-profit sector, because you offer so much more and can compete at a different level other than just pay. So when you think about your total rewards, you really need to leverage whatever it is around recognition or compensation that you can say, and this is what we can offer you, and this is where we stand above the others in the sector in order to attract people. Typically, in salary and incentives, you've got base pay, you've got short-term incentive, you've got long-term incentives with respect to salary. So this is cash compensation, and those are the aspects that you're looking for. In the not-for-profit sector, we don't see a lot of short-term and long-term incentives. Starting to see a little bit more, and also starting to see more bonuses being paid, and organizations getting creative on how they can create an opportunity to bonus their people. But again, you see this a lot more in the corporate sector as opposed to the not-for-profit sector, but there are not-for-profits that are getting good at this as well. And again, you need to consider the proportion of each component when you're designing your program. So the purpose of this slide is think broad and don't think too narrow when you're putting together your program. As I mentioned, we've got bonuses now coming within the sector that we need to think about. So when you're actually going out to the market and looking at your data and things like that, you look at many, many things other than just the pay grades. And so when we get into the Boland survey and start talking about that, the Boland survey is great for lots of information. Make sure that you're fully utilizing that report and not just saying, I got to look at the pay grade. Like, that would be so unfortunate, because you're getting so much more when you get the Boland survey, and Tracy will talk about that later. It has got lots of great information on total comp, total rewards, so make sure you fully utilize your surveys.
Sorry, just saying, you said you had total comp, so does it have in there, like, you know, what companies are offering us in 6 days? Like,
yeah, it does, and Tracy's going to talk to that. Yeah. It's great in that respect, and Tracy's going to speak specifically to that later in the morning. Okay, do you want to quickly talk about the program design, Nadia, in terms of ranges and the base pay? So now we're moving into a conversation where we're focusing in on your salary. I'm hoping that we've planted that seed to don't just think about salaries, but salaries and determining how you're competitive and how you frame your salaries is a big part of your program and your design. So we are spending quite a number of minutes, this 3 hours, talking about it. So Nadia, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so just to begin, I don't know how many of you would be responsible for sort of designing a comp or a base pay structure in your organization. Do you have a comp person? I'm guessing probably not. How many of you personally would be responsible for creating something like that? So pretty much the majority of you. So that's what I wanted to talk about for the next few minutes. What is a base pay structure? What is a base pay structure? A salary scale? Sorry, what was that? A starting point, right? Yeah, pretty much it's a series of pay grades that you want to group your employees into. So I have a diagram, and when we get to the diagram, we'll talk about some of these definitions and why they're important to know. Do you have the slide?
Yes, I do. Yeah. I should give it to you. Perfect. I'm all about control, you know.
So first things that I wanted to talk about is when you think about your organization's salary structure, how many pay grades are appropriate to have? And I want to talk about this because I know a lot of your organizations are smaller, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have a limited number of bands. For example, I just did a small review for a not-for-profit organization, only 22 salaried employees, and that included the executive director. Yet I still came up with 6 different pay grade levels. Why is that? What went into that consideration? A big thing that you want to think about is you really want to think about the responsibilities of those roles, and when you're grouping them, you want to make sure that as you move from pay grade to pay grade, that there is a very clear, very evident distinction between their responsibilities. You want to make sure in any situation or whatever that you can't have, example, accountant 1 and accountant 2 in the same pay grade. Like, those are things to be aware of. Additionally, any managerial or executive positions need to have their own pay band, which I'm sure you guys are aware of that. And the other thing to think of is the higher the number of bands, the greater the career progression that an employee has the potential to kind of move through the organization. If you only have 2 or 3 bands, in a way it might sort of limit someone from from growing, from moving up sort of thing. So it really depends on your organization, your needs. Some companies will group their bands by whether they're technical or professional roles. Other organizations might group it by entry-level, intermediate, senior, managerial, executive, based on increased responsibility. But like it says here, something you really want to make sure of is make sure that everyone that you have placed in a band, that their supervisor is, or their whoever they report to, is perhaps in the band above, perhaps 2 bands above, and that's something you want to think about and define. That's the simple form. The complicated one, which I won't talk about too much, if you do get some compensation support, such as myself or whatever, what we would do is we would take a look at individual jobs, benchmark them to market data, and then tie that in to create the salary structure. But that's a conversation for another day, but just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about how large you want your organization structure to be. And so just a picture of what a salary structure should typically look like if it's graphed out. And you'll notice the bands get wider as the pay grade gets higher, and that's generally just because managerial or executive levels have a higher spread sort of thing. Some definitions that we want to talk about is range minimum and range maximum. It's pretty straightforward. Range minimum is the bottom of the band. So it looks like for this one, it's the first band, it's around 38,000 is the range minimum, and the range maximum looks to be around, I don't know, let's say 44,000. Now you'll notice that the bands have a lot of overlap. Why do they overlap? You'll never see a salary band that goes pay grade 1 is 38,000 to 50,000 and pay grade 2 starts at 50,000. That's never how it works. And the reason for that, the range overlap, is, like we talked about before, is to allow that progression throughout the structure, so that if an employee gets a promotion or a performance increase or whatnot, that they have that room and that flexibility to grow within their band. Does that make sense? And yes, yeah.
That somebody at a lower pay grade could actually be making more than someone at a higher.
Technically, yes. Technically, yes. But it also depends on your comp philosophy. So really quickly here, say your organization says, I'm going to pay at the 50th percentile of the market, and you have a rough idea in your head that for every new hire, an approximate starting point is going to be the middle of the band. So if you start like that, you shouldn't run into those problems where someone at a lower band is making more than someone at a higher band. There could be an odd situation where someone at a lower band might have been in their role for so many years that they've got so many pay increases and they're not interested in moving to a higher level. But that's not typical, but it is possible. Range spread, I just wanted to, the range spread is not something you have to follow. It's just a really rough guideline and a rule of thumb. But basically how you calculate the range spread is, for each band, you'll take the band maximum minus the band minimum and divide it by the band minimum again. So band maximum minus band minimum divided by band minimum. And then you times that by 100 to get your range spread. Now, typically, and like I said, this is just a really general rule of thumb. You do not have to follow this. But for admin or technical positions, your range spread is generally around 30%, and again, really rough number. And then as you move up to professional or supervisor level roles, you're looking at closer to a 40% range spread. And then when you get to executive level roles, your range spread should never be below 50%. So that's just like a check you can do once you have created your pay grades to kind of see if they fall in line. If you see for lower level roles, like administrative roles, those entry level bands, if you have a range spread of 60%, then I would be a little bit concerned. won't go into too much more detail on that. Something we wanted to talk about really quickly is broadbanding. Have any of you guys heard that term before? One person. Broadbanding is kind of a thing, a newer trend these days, and a lot of companies think it's something that they want to do, and it really depends on your organization. It either will totally work for your organization or it totally won't work. And basically it's instead of an organization, say maybe having 12 bands, that they make them broader bands into maybe 3 or 4. And it can either work really well for your organization or it won't work. Generally, a larger organization that's more complex, this will work best for. Again, it just totally depends. I've put some advantages and disadvantages, and I'll just briefly go through them. When you talk about why might our company want to have broadbands, well, definitely improving your competitive advantage, because what you're doing when you're implementing a broadbanded structure is you're getting rid of that hierarchical structure, and you're kind of showing your employees that you're more flexible, that they have more room to grow. Perhaps an employee won't be as focused as, okay, I'm on pay grade 3, and focused on exactly where they fall, and they might be more willing to grow and develop, sort of thing. So that's the number one advantage. And other things could be supports a flatter organizational structure. So pay bands often mirror the number of reporting levels or whatnot within an organization. So if you have fewer bands, it might sort of get rid of that, again, hierarchical level. Disadvantages is definitely lack of structure. If you're not 100% familiar with this, it might just create chaos and confusion. The other thing is that if you're so focused, like if it's in your comp philosophy that you are 100% market competitive and you care very much what that market price is for a particular job, then you might actually have to end up within your broadbands redefining specific market rates for each position, which would just in turn cause more work. So again, it depends on your comp philosophy, but if you're not that 100% market competitive, then perhaps broadbands can be for you. Any questions on that?
In my experience, this is one where there's a lot of interest but little application because it's a big cultural leap.
Right.
And you have to let go of ego because there's a lot of ego in title. So say, for example, you decide to broadband supervisors into one broadband instead of 2 bands.
Right.
You know, when you go up to a manager, there's certainly, your ego says, well, I'm the manager now, I should be in another band, right? So you have to let go of your ego. This one really hinges to your philosophy, and you have to have a unique philosophy or culture to really make this work.
Right. Yeah. Another thing I've noticed in my personal experience from being in a company that had broadbands is I noticed that managers needed a lot more training when it came time to performance increases and things like that, because the bands were so wide and sort of unstructured that we needed a lot more guidance or compensation expertise to each of the managers, and that was an additional
That's a really good point, Natty, because everybody thinks you got a broad band, right? Whoopee, I'll just put everybody up into the, the 50th percentile, the 70th percentile, and because the broads are, that could be very devastating because you would never be able to fund something like that. So that's a really good point.
Right,
yeah.
right. So like generally speaking, it only works for really large, complex organizations. Otherwise, I wouldn't spend too much time thinking about that. Okay. Janet, I'm going to pass the mic back to you to chat for a few minutes.
All right, we're going to take a break at 10:30, but we're going to, I don't need that. Great, thanks. So thanks, Nadia, for that. So again, we want to just thinking about when you're doing your program design, what does it mean if you've got a comp philosophy that says we're externally competitive, market competitive, as opposed to internal equitable. And so just a few, I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this because we've talked about it already, but again, in your program design, that's going to be important considerations. And it's also going to be important to what do you do to test your structure as well, right? Because if you're market competitive, what are you going to have to do? find data, right? You're going to have to go out and you're going to find data to test whether or not you're competitive, right? So to get data, you need to say, you know, can we get reliable data from the market? And if we do, where do we go to get that? We typically in the sector are using the Bolin survey, so that's what we're using when we work with most of our not-for-profits. You also can get some information off the public domain, which I don't discredit. The problem with information on the public domain is sometimes it's self-serving, right? So from a vetting perspective, I mean, it's another data point. We should never discredit data points, right? It's another data point, but you need to always think, is it self-serving? Who put that data together? To really test it, and we're often brought in to vet surveys, salary structures, we like to rely on an independent third party that's done the survey, right? So in that respect, we've been finding that the Bolin survey has been very good for that. Do you want to add to that? Because I also know that you also go out when you look for data points in the public domain, and I mean that's free data too, right?
Yeah, yes and no. I'm kind of biased against using data that you can find online, mainly like pay scale. It's not a reliable source. It's people go on there and enter what they made. It's completely arbitrary. I wouldn't rely on it. There are other survey sources on the public domain. Hayes has the salary guide and Robert Half has a salary guide. Those are somewhat more reputable, but like Janet said, the Bolin survey or an independent survey is probably your best bet if you want to really maintain that data integrity and get reliable data.
At a really good price. I'm not doing a sell job, but honestly, for the price that you get compared to some of these other surveys. I know I'm doing a pitch for you, Tracy, but I have to say, for us to go in and do a job for an organization, we need good data, right? So we encourage our people we coach them to say, in order for us to do our jobs, we have to have information, right? So we basically say to our organizations we're working with, purchase the survey, right? Because we need that data. So something, but again, Tracy's going to talk about that. I guess what I'd like you to do, how are we doing for time? I'm just going to take a quick look here. 10:15. Just going to take a quick look here. I would like to have a little short conversation at our table. I think conversation at our table is important, so we're going to talk. How many positions, talk about your program at your table. How is your salary program designed? How many positions, how many bands? Share at your table what that's looking like. Is your organization focused internally or externally? And based on what you've heard today, what might you do differently as you leave here? So have a short conversation, just share at your table and think. And if you guys want to turn around and share at your other tables, that would be great as well. So we'll just take a couple of minutes to talk. Can I just get everybody to regroup for a minute? And can we just share how many people in the room actually have a structure where you've got bands? Okay, great. Okay, all right, not everybody then. All right. And, you know, if you were to think about your organization, is it more internally focused versus market competitive? Where's the focus?
We try to do both.
Sorry, we should probably get the...
Yeah, here,
Sorry?
I can just, if you just want to...
Okay. Sorry, we'll start here and then I'll come over here.
Well, I think in our company, it's basically external.
External, okay. All right. And you're... Bobby?
We try to do both. So what I've done is I have a salary range, but then I also have done scales.
Okay.
So I put... We like to be mid to high range in the market, but then our skills is also how long have you been here, that type of stuff. So I really use both.
Right. Okay, you'll often see many organizations using that how long have I been with the organization to try to get that internal equity piece, right? You can get really complicated with the internal equity and we won't even go there because we wouldn't recommend it for a lot of you, right? So that internal is usually that discussion about, you know, what skills do they bring, how long have they been here, those sort, to find that equity, internal equity piece, and that's fine. That's good. Yep. Okay, and have you picked up anything this morning that might say, I think I need to go back and look at my bands? And if yes, what is that? Does anybody want to share?
You can just put your hand up so I can run my favorite microphone.
What have you heard or what are you thinking about that you might want to go back and have a look at? Anybody? Yeah?
Just sharing
my organization has all independent contractors. We have no employees, and it's so arbitrary how we pay, and it's pretty contractor-driven versus organization-driven, how we compensate. So we need to go back and look at all of it.
Right, and start with that philosophy, right? Think about that higher level and get good data on contractor compensation, which you can get in the Bolin survey, right? Yeah, which I didn't even realize until actually recently, because I'm not working a lot in comp, but you can get that data too. So that's good. Okay, so lots to think about, right? To get that structure, even some structure, to break away from that arbitrary, I think I'll just pay this. And what's wrong with arbitrary? Pardon? Tough to defend. Yeah, exactly. Very tough to defend. Sets you up as a risk too. Just takes one person to complain, right? To say you're not treating me fairly. And all of a sudden you've got a claim from human rights or about inequity. So really, if you do have it all over the place, just try to get some parameters, something, and shift yourself. Just start shifting yourself. It's great. Just begin baby steps though, right? You don't have to reinvent the whole wheel. Just start with some parameters, right? And then go from there. Baby steps. I always say when it comes to compensation, baby steps, right? Don't do too much at once because again, you need to get it right. So go slower than faster and making sure you've got that good definition. This hits people's pocketbooks. You want to get it right. So slower than faster and utilize any subject matter experts that you've got access to, whether that's people on your board, whether that's outside consultants. Use whatever support you can. Many people have board members that have got comp backgrounds, right? And not that you want them involved in your operations, but a coffee sometimes is not a bad idea when you're developing your comp philosophy because they're going to approve it at the end of the day. So again, seek some support and some help. Okay, what did I do with my clicker?
Oh, the clicker. You put it on the table.
Okay, we're going to have a quick break, and then we're going to come back, and Natty, you're going to take them through some survey information and how to utilize it in that, again, that development of your foundational piece, which are your bands. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll be back here at no later than 25 to. And move forward. We're going to move into a conversation about surveys and how do you use survey data. And so we've talked about the philosophy, we've talked about program design, and now we're validating information, particularly if you're market focused. So Natty's going to take us through some slides that talk about compensation surveys in general and how to work with the data on compensation surveys. And then at 11 o'clock we're going to turn it over to Tracy, and she's going to talk to you about the Bolin survey. So I'll just hand it over to you. Here's the control.
Thanks, Janet. So I think Janet asked this before, but I'm just going to ask again. How many of you are currently using the Bolin salary survey? Okay, so you are familiar with it. How many of you submit your organization's data to that survey? Majority of you. So a lot more of you submit, but not as many of you utilize that data. So hopefully we can change that around after today. Just some basic things when we're talking about salary surveys. As you know, when you submit your data, it's never shown in an individual form. Data is always displayed in an aggregate form. Job matching. Job matching is so important. I'm assuming a lot of you do your own job matching. And I used to work for a company similar to Bolin that produced its own surveys. And for every company that submitted data, I literally met with each of them, whether it was someone such as yourselves or whatnot, and reviewed every single job match. And the reason for that is everything you do, everything that's to come is based on the quality of these job matches. So if you have an accountant one and the Bolin survey has an accountant one, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a match. So never match jobs just on title alone, which I'm sure most of you know, but if you don't, never do it. A job should always be matched based on the content and the responsibilities. Another thing I've noticed when working with a lot of organizations is sometimes they will match a job to that individual who's currently performing that job to their particular responsibilities. So say you have admin 1, admin 2, and admin 3. The administrative coordinator in your organization performs extra duties. So therefore, you might go ahead and match that administrative coordinator to a higher level of admin, and you should never do that. You should never match a job to salary data based on the incumbent. It should only be matched on the job description alone. And the reason for that is if somebody else comes to do that administrative coordinator, then you don't want to be matched to market data that's too high than what the market is paying. So those are just some guidelines when matching your jobs. And general rule of thumb that we like to say is a good job match is meeting 80% or more of the job content listed. There's something else that you'll see on the next slide, blending and weighting. Definitions. So in a perfect world, you would have a perfect match for each job description in your organization. But of course, it's not a perfect world. And so very frequently, you will find that for a role in your organization, there is no perfect match. And instead of just taking what's closest to it, I want you to know that it's perfectly acceptable to take 2 or 3 jobs and combine them as one match. That's very common in what we do. It's totally appropriate to say, I'm going to match this job to both of these survey matches, and then just take a blend of the 2. If you want to get a little more complicated, and I don't suppose you'll ever find the need to, but something else we've done is if we are matching one job to 2 survey matches, we might notice that it's closer match to one job than another, so we might weight it 70% to one match and 30% to another match, but that's just a little complicated. You don't have to do that. You could just take the average of the 2 matches. But it's better to match one job to 2 matches instead of a job that's not 100% accurate to that job. Does that make sense? Yeah. And for those of you that have used the Bolin survey, I'm sure you're familiar that it's broken down by operating budget and geographical location. And we always like to recommend that if there is data available, that you try and narrow it down as specific as possible. So for the Bolin survey, you'll notice that there is an all Alberta category, and then there's a specific Calgary category. So if there is data available in the Calgary category, why not use that instead of all of Alberta? Likewise, in the Bolin salary survey, you'll notice they have survey data listed for overall for all companies that participated, and then they'll show a separate one for companies with an operating budget of $1 to $5 million, $5 to $10 million. So usually there is data there, and if that is available to you, I highly recommend to use that instead of the general for all of Alberta, all operating revenues. Sometimes, I don't think the Bolin survey does this, but some other larger surveys might also break down data by sector. So if they work in the technological sector or energy services or not-for-profit. So if that is that filter to break it down is available to you, we definitely think that you should always use it. The thing with using filters or looking at data that's specific to one region or one operating budget is that sometimes they don't have enough companies that have participated in those sections. So general rule of thumb, unless there's 5 companies or more, and the survey shows you how many incumbents there are. Unless there's 5 or more, I don't like to use the data point just because I don't think it's as reliable. And Tracy, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the Bolin survey doesn't display data if it's 3 or more. So if they don't have enough data sources, they won't even display it. So just some basic terminology. I'm thinking you'll be familiar with a lot of this, but if not, I just want to go over. The real thing I want to talk about is mean or median. And when you're looking to get the middle of the survey data, which are you looking for, the mean or the median?
I would go with the median.
Why would you go with the median?
Because if you have an outlier, it can change the mean average. It really skews the mean average.
Absolutely. So that's just one thing we want to reiterate is never, never, never use the mean. Always use the median. The mean is more sensitive to outliers. Any data points that are high or low, it'll really take those into effect, where the median kind of balances it out and it's more accurate overall. So when you notice the data points in the Boland salary survey, they'll have the 25th percentile, P50th percentile. The 50th percentile is the median, and we always want to use the median. If you are doing your own sort of compensation calculations and you have multiple salaries, again, do not take the average, calculate the median, which is the midpoint. Range, P25, P50, P75. I think the Boland survey also displays the 10th percentile and the 90th percentile. So like we talked about before, if your organization's defined that we want to pay our employees at the 10th percentile, or we want to pay our employees at minimum the 90th percentile, the most common is the 50th percentile. Just a side note, if you're looking at market data for a particular position in the Boland salary survey and you want a range, say your organization pays at the median, the 50th percentile, and you want a range, what I like to do is I like to use the 25th percentile as the bottom of my range and the 75th percentile as the top of my range. And that gives me a not too broad but a pretty specific range that I can take back in case, and I always like to give a range when you're looking at a new hire because it's totally dependent on the person's experience and their skill set and what they're bringing to the table. So you don't necessarily want to always look at that middle number. And so to create a range, or if you want a broader range, you could use as data points the 10th percentile and the 90th percentile as well. And so we touched on this a little bit about hybrid jobs when you're matching two or more jobs to one match. Something else you can do, although for the not-for-profit sector, the Boland survey is probably your best bet, but if you do have other salary surveys, I mean, the more data you have, it's always more reliable. So something we call the market rate composite is if we're taking different matches from different surveys and kind of just blending them together. It's the same thing as taking two matches from one survey. What I really want to talk about, though, is aging. How many of you know what aging data is? First question. Well, my second question was how many of you utilize aging data? So aging is so important when you're using market data, and aging is pretty much just bringing your market data to the current point in time. A lot of organizations, especially smaller not-for-profit ones, can't afford, although the Boland survey is quite competitively priced, a lot of companies can't afford to buy new survey data every year. A lot of companies say, I'm going to buy it every other year. So if you've bought 2015 data and you're not getting data again until 2017, now it's the end of 2016 and you go to hire someone, you're using old data. You want to make sure that you bring that data up to where the market is paying today. That's why aging is so important. Now, this year, with the market and all, I don't think the market has grown as much. Typically, in Calgary, in good times, taking an average of all sectors, the market typically increases 2 to 3% every year. So if you're aging, that's typically what you're aging by is what the market has grown by. For this year, I don't know if I would say the market's grown at all, or perhaps it would be a slighter percentage. But surveys, I think the Boland survey shows how much the market has grown each year, so you will have that available to you. And I want us to do an aging exercise because it's really easy to do, and once you get the hang of it, you will You'll see how easy it is to do. Another thing to point out is, say you get the Bolin survey, which is produced in October. So it's produced October 2016. Now it's January 2017 and you're hiring someone. It's only 3 months have passed, but the market has still grown. So you still need to age the data even if it's just by 3 months. Make sense? I wrote the aging formula on the board. I'm not sure if it's big enough and if you can all read it. The aging formula is the number of months to age. So say only 3 months have passed from your survey data, you're going to divide the number of months to age by 12 months, and then you're going to times it by the annual aging factor, which is going to be listed for you in the Bolin survey. Like I said, on average, it's 2 to 3% a year when the market is functioning at a normal capacity. And that's your survey aging factor. What does survey aging factor mean? Once you do this calculation, you'll get a number. Say your number is 1 or 2% or 1.5%. What does that number mean? That number means is you need to take the market data that you see in the Bolin salary survey. So say you see for a social worker, the Bolin survey says 48,500. You take 48,500 and you times it by that 1.05 or whatever it is that you come up with for the survey aging factor. So it sounds complicated, but I promise it's really easy, and we're going to do a couple practice examples to get the hang of it. So I've written the formula as well up there, and there's 3 questions. Before I go ahead and give you some time to work on these questions, I want to talk about aging over a period of more than 1 year, because the formula changes a little bit. When you're aging more than 2 years, you have to do each year separately. You can't do it together, so you have to do each year separately. Age 1 year first, and then age the second year, and then you want to compound the increases. So that'll be applicable for question number 3. So just remember, for question number 3, you want to do each year separately. I'm going to give you guys 10 minutes to work on these 3 questions. If you need a calculator, you can use your phone, and if you have any questions, I'll just be walking around, and in a few minutes we can gather and go through them.
Yeah, probably be a bit less. Sorry. Nadia, can I? Okay, I think we're going to bring everybody back, and Nadia's just going to quickly walk through the answers.
Hi. Yeah. Can I get everyone's attention again? Awesome. Silly me actually didn't realize that the answers were on the next slide. That's okay. I mean, as long as you have an example laid out in front of you so you can refer to it when you're looking to age data on your own. Do we have any questions, though? Is it pretty straightforward when you're following the formula? So do you guys understand when you get this aging factor of 1.17%, what you're doing with that 1.17%? Timesing it by what's in the survey data. I know as I walked around and just overhearing conversations, the first question I heard, the first thing I almost heard everyone asking one another, do you guys do this? Do you this? No, we've never done anything like this and we never will. And like I discussed with some people, really it's only important to age if you are purchasing survey data every other year, or every 3 years or whatnot, because not everyone can afford to buy it every year. If it's just a few months, you know, I wouldn't worry about it. Even if you did do the whole aging formula for a few months, you'll get such a small percentage, like 0.04 or something, that it's a negligible difference. But it's just considered a best practice to always make sure your market data is current.
And it's good messaging too. I was talking to this table too, to let people know that you do pay attention to relevancy and making sure that your data is up to date. So saying to people and to your board and or your staff that we do keep our foundation current, especially if you've invested in developing it. That's a good message. And by the way, we got a process to do it. Whoopee, that's right. Great.
And really it doesn't seem relevant right now because of the way our market is, but when the market is growing and it's a hot market, aging is very, very relevant, just to know that those salaries are changing and we need to keep up with them every year. So that's pretty much it for surveys before I hand it off to Tracy to talk more in detail about the Bolin survey. Just really quickly here, let's look at this question, and I kind of want you to think back to everything we've talked about today. And shall we say 1 or 2 minutes for discussion, and then we'll get back together?
Yeah, we can, just very, very quickly, if you, Maddie, why don't we do that, very, very quickly.
Sure, just take a minute and just think about some of the things you need to keep in mind. And then we'll reconvene in a minute here.
Information you need to know is what your organization's comp philosophy is.
Exactly, yeah.
Where they want to pay.
Yes.
And how old is this data?
That's right, yeah. Good job. Here, do you want to put this on Tracy?
Do you want that? I can take it.
Yeah, because I'm done. Yeah, I'm done.
All right, there we go. So, do you have a pocket that you can put this on too? No. Well, then push it.
If I want to talk now, I'll use the mic.
Okay, sure. Do you want me to feed it through your jacket? Yeah, probably.
We're really close to TCO.
It's okay, I did this for Janet too. You're not the only one.
Oh, good.
Okay, you want to test that?
Testing. Probably closer. Oh.
I don't know. I'll adjust, no, I don't have your, I will adjust the volume. Okay. I will adjust the volume.
Okay, just in the interest of time, if we could reconvene here and we can discuss as a group. So just really quickly, does anyone want to share what they discussed at their table? This table over here on the left?
Well, I thought it makes a big difference depending on the program. You may have a program that's pretty simple to administer.
Right.
Or you may have one that's really complicated and really demanding.
Right, so information that you might need would be a job match, a job description to make sure it's the right job match. Okay, anything else? The philosophy of your organization, definitely, that's one of the first things you'd need to know. Sector would be good, yeah. I don't think for the Bolin survey, because it's not for profit, it's not broken down, but if you were looking at a larger survey, definitely you would have to know the sector and geographical location or operating revenue budgets. Anything else? Experience of the person. And then you'd also have to kind of balance that with your organization's compensation philosophy. Do you have a philosophy that we'd like to bring in our employees at the 25th percentile of the market, right? That's definitely something you need to know. And one last thing I would add in is also how old is this data? If it's from October 2015 or whatnot. So that's pretty much our part from Salopec for surveys. Any questions before we hand it off to Tracy? If you do have any questions, we can always chat afterwards, so come talk to either Janet or myself afterwards. Okay, thanks guys.